Glad that you're still here with us on Morning Express, and it's now time for lifestyle. And on lifestyle, normally on Wednesday, we look at and focus on relationships. And today, as usual, we have our crew, and on the set, there's Ken Ouko, who's a sociologist. Welcome, and good to have you. How has your week been? Sorry?
I didn't say welcome.
Today you are weak, which is a good thing. It's a good start. Last week we almost asked you where you spent the night.
What a scandal, man.
Yeah, so welcome and good to have you. How has your week been?
Okay, quiet. Work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Chris Hart, who is a relationship expert, great to have you as well. Your week has been good?
Yeah, very good.
How is it dealing with relationships for a profession?
Oh, it can actually be quite grueling.
I can imagine.
You imagine sitting with a whole series of people who are all quite distraught about whatever's going on in their life. It can really get to you. In fact, one of the things that people like me have to do is they have to have somebody that they can then go and talk to.
Right. So who do you talk to?
Well, we call it supervision, you know. We're another psychologist that you can just offload some of the issues that come up.
And I guess by human nature, people come to you with issues. Do you ever have couples who come and say, oh, we're having such a wonderful relationship?
Never, ever happens. I have never had anybody come to see me because they're happy.
Because they're happy.
It just doesn't.
You know, the worst thing about it is that the guys who come to see you, they're waiting for a solution. And so you do tell them, okay, let me look at this, let me hear you out. And then you sit at home, you know, stressing yourself, trying to find a solution for them, when maybe, you know, you're wishing somebody could just tell you, we are so happy we just came to report.
So anytime you see somebody walking in, it's an issue.
It's always an issue.
Trouble.
Of course
Must
it
be
is.
very draining.
Of course it is. You know.
Must be very draining. All right, today we're looking at emotional abuse. And Chris, how does one, first of all, identify emotional abuse? By virtue of the fact that it's emotional, I imagine, first of all, it's very subtle.
One of the biggest problems with emotional abuse is that it normally starts very quietly. You know, you first meet somebody, everything's all sweetness and light, you're having a great time, best person you've ever met. And it might be months or maybe years before the emotional abuse starts. And it can start so quietly you don't realize it's happening. And so to begin with, you're thinking, that was a bit odd, you know. But then gradually it really starts to wear you down. But by that time, you yourself are being affected and you are becoming less able to work out what's going on. So it's one of the most insidious problems that happens in a marriage. It can be quite devastating. It's one of the three absolute killers in a relationship. There are three things that if they happen, you're almost certainly going to have to abandon the relationship.
So emotional abuse, at the point you discover it, that should be a deal breaker.
It's definitely a deal breaker. Yeah, if you cannot fix it, it's sometimes possible to fix. But if it's being caused itself by something that can't be fixed, like a personality disorder, then of course it's well, either I get used to this or I leave. And if you're unhappy, why stay? I know he always criticizes me for saying, get out.
Get out.
But the fact is, you know, there are a few things where you simply can't fix relationships, and so it's better to say no.
Okay. Ken, is there a way of identifying that one is being emotionally abused, especially at the starting point? Because I imagine with abuse, it never seems to reduce. It always seems to be on a high.
You know, Michael, there are those little things we tell each other in a relationship, especially in marriage. And they're the ones that keep us going. You know, sometimes you marry such a horrible character, but the only way to keep surviving is to, you know, look for the sentimental
And
pattern.
I guess that's where Chris says, get out of it.
Yeah, I know. And I always say, struggle on.
Yeah.
But you see, sometimes when you talk about neglect, emotional neglect, that's actually the platform on which this whole thing is built. That you never tell each other nice things. You know I love you, no, I miss you, no. You know, there's no expression. And once you start from there, you realize that you become dependent on that other person. You're waiting for them to show you that they love you, they miss you, they want you, they desire you. And if that never comes along, then you start feeling neglected emotionally. In fact, the women who cheat eventually bank their excuse on this thing called emotional malnutrition. But they never get anything from their spouses. They never get anything from their partners. So you're there physically, you can be a very good provider, you give everything she needs, but you're not there emotionally. You don't feel each other. Yeah, and once that starts, then you have trouble.
Yes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That is one of the major issues. Relationships can hollow out You know, they can appear superficially okay. People are talking over the breakfast table, but there's no real conversation.
Yes.
So there's that type of abuse. But then there are other types of abuse. For example...
And that still is emotional abuse?
Oh, very much so, yes. But at the other extreme, you've got the much more proactive abuse, if you like. The person who is abusing you, perhaps they're controlling you. Perhaps they are, maybe they've got some very deep-seated insecurity, and so every time you so much as glance across the restaurant, you're having an affair, you know.
Already.
And that type of abuse can be very, very hard to deal with. You get abuse of other sorts. People, in addition to being controlling, they can be, I'm not quite sure how to put it, they have needs that they want you to fulfill, and it's actually quite unreasonable that they're asking for them. They're dumping all their emotions on you. Perhaps the slightest thing you say gets blown into an enormous attack, you know, anger at the drop of a hat. I've come across people who've had blazing rows with the guys actually driving a car, you know, down the motorway. And that's abuse.
Yeah,
So-
the worst part is when the person, they don't reciprocate. You know, they expect so much of you, but they
But
give
they're
you
not
nothing
giving
back.
you anything back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they keep blaming you for their inability to be happy, but then they're not making a contribution towards being happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in case you're watching us right now and you're joining us, we're talking about emotional abuse. Chris Hart in the studio, and also Ken Ouko. Remember, our numbers are going to be displayed on the screen, and feel free to call and let us know. Share your experience, or maybe you have a question for them in regards to emotional abuse, how you can identify it, and possibly if you've reached that point where you feel this is not going to work, what's the way forward? You can also tweet, and the Twitter handle is at Michael G. Gitonga. Now, Chris, one of the things I imagine that would cause one to be or to be vulnerable to emotional abuse is dependency. And
yes.
we do know that unless you're happy yourself, really asking somebody else to bring joy into your life is being unfair. So how does one deal with that when you're so dependent on a spouse or a partner to a point where now they will abuse you because you feel...
Well, of course, the whole thing is a little bit cyclical. People who tend to abuse have a tendency to pick vulnerable partners. So the girl who is, say, not financially independent, or a girl who is herself rather insecure, becomes prey to the people who like to abuse. You see what I mean?
They always seem to have a way they connect.
Oh, they just spot you a mile off. You know, they literally
Is it
go
an
looking.
intentional spotting?
Yes, I think it is. I don't think it's conscious, but it's clearly intentional. They are attracted to people who are vulnerable. And there's a whole category of people who abuse. I mean, we've mentioned some of them, the neglectful type, but there's the personality disorders. There's the so-called erratic and dramatic personality disorders are very, very abusive. And those people really can make your life a total misery. And then, of course, there are addicts. Anybody who's addicted to something tends to become very emotionally abusive because they want support for their addiction. And so they start wheeling you in. You know, I'm not really drinking, so you need to protect me. I need my reputation maintaining, you know. And you quite deliberately try and get your partner to massage the whole relationship so that it's okay in the public eye.
Ken?
Yeah, you know, the way you look at it is like, here's someone who says they love you, but they know that you need them more than they need you. Yeah, so when you have what we call pedestal love, where you elevate the other person and you're supposed to be the subservient one in that relationship, either economically, like Chris says, they know that you need them and you dare not try to think of living without them, or sometimes, you know, the age gap thing. The guy is much older, the girl is much younger, and he can back at her but still say, I love you. Yeah, so this girl will try to reciprocate with everything of hers, but the guy is like investing 2% of himself in that relationship. Once you have that disequilibrium, then the emotional bit becomes totally incongruent. Yeah, because then you could do such nice things like buy them nice cards, bring chocolate. But like Chris says, you can be sitting across the table, exchanging the chocolate, but there's nothing else other than
is not
yes, it's not there. And so when that person keeps asking questions like, do you really love me? And then you can't keep saying, of course, because they're supposed to feel it. Yeah, so when they kind of make that demand, you know, for you to express yourself to them. But then when you ask the reverse, like, how about you? Do you love me? Yeah, then they say, but that's obvious, you can see it. Yeah, and then they're not showing it. So basically, you know, emotional imbalances are really, like he says, deal breaker. I think that's the term. Because once you realize the other person is becoming dependent, you will definitely want to suppress their freedom, you want to suppress their independence, and that messes up the whole thing.
Is it possible, Chris, that sometimes when the one who is being emotionally abused, I don't want to say has asked for it, but maybe out of their vulnerability, the other person now begins to feel like, I'm really not here to provide that for you, and as a result now it begins becoming abusive?
If someone who is a little vulnerable meets up with someone who is a very secure, confident person in relationships, the exact reverse happens. They actually draw them out and make them secure.
True.
And so it becomes an equal relationship.
Right.
The tragedy of emotional abuse is that the person who's spotted you is not secure. They are themselves deeply insecure and have all sorts of issues. And now they work them out on you. Now, of course, they make the whole matter worse. So I don't think there's ever a case where you can say the abused person is asking for it. It's never that. If they meet the right person, they'll be fine. Somebody who's insecure with a secure person, they'll be fine. But if they're with a psychopath, life's going to get real tough.
Ken, does emotional abuse ever reduce? Is it possible to solve it? Because you're dealing with an insecurity, and sometimes you cannot cure somebody's insecurity. You create it.
That's a really hard question. The answer is yes and no, because some abuse cannot be cured. If you are being abused by a narcissist or a borderline or something like that, it's just not going to be fixed. Those people refuse help. They absolutely believe that they are right and everybody else is wrong, including the psychologist, you know. So they won't accept help. And so if you are with someone like that, leave. On the other hand, it might all have just grown up as habit. It might just have been one of those stupid things that slowly evolved in the relationship. And with those guys, if you start giving them some rules to live by, the habits get broken. It's hard. It's a bit like giving up smoking, but it's doable. But
yeah, even though I always see some bright light in the sky.
Not with borderlines, you know.
Yes, of course.
There is no hope.
Yeah, but sometimes when you realize the problem, I think we've said here before that recognizing the problem is the beginning of salvation. Once you know my ways are not right, the way I'm doing this thing is not correct, then you can actually do something about yourself. Correcting the other person is a no-no, because they're kind of people who, even when you take him before a therapist, they'll tell you, no, I'm okay. You know, it's this woman who's bringing all the trouble in our lives. Yeah, and so sometimes then you get tempted to try and improve on yourself. And if you do that, like we said at the beginning of this, happiness starts with you. If you realize that I'm not happy because of ABCD, and then you seek that happiness and you find it, the other person might be tempted to bandwagon, to become just as happy as you. But if you're hoping to get it from them, never works.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but sometimes, you know, the solutions can be really quite quick. I mean, a classic example is almost every couple are people with different personalities.
Right.
Opposites attract. We select people who are different from us. 2 years into the relationship, we're busy trying to convert each other into ourselves. And of course, a huge amount of distress starts.
And no wonder the first 5 years are normally
That's right.
terrible.
So now, if you just simply say to people, listen, you cannot change this person. Please let them be themselves. So every time you feel you want to criticize them, you want to control, stop it. Now, intelligent people who don't have themselves a personality disorder can instantly do that. And so suddenly the couples stop crunching each other all the time. And in a week they can be happy.
Ken, how important is it for one to draw emotional lines and be comfortable within those lines? Because I think from what Chris is saying, one of the reasons why there is likelihood of being abused is because there's all this mix-up. I'm trying to make you me, you're trying to make me you, and there's all this mix-up. How do you draw emotional lines?
you know, when you mature in a relationship, the beauty of it is that you learn the other person. And once you get to know them, you know what to expect and what not to expect from them. And believe you me, once you understand the limits of a person, then it's very easy for you to create your operational domain in between those limits. Yeah, because you know, for example, if you tell them something like, let's go sit and watch the sunset, they'll never agree with you, even though that's one of the most romantic things on earth. Yeah, but the guy will be like, no, I have work to do.
That's a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a waste of time. So you know, for example, that you will seek such pleasures in another way. Yeah, like probably tell him, let's watch a series together on TV, because maybe that he'll do even though he'll fall asleep. But at least he's next to you. So when you create those, that domain within which you operate, then you will find your happiness in there. Yeah, the other problem is actually, like Chris keeps saying, the personality of the person. It's a big barrier into seeking emotional stability and happiness for yourself, because you could be trying to be very happy, but the guy comes home and he criticizes everything you do and everything you are. So then you're thinking, why am I making all the effort? Yeah, because if you keep trying and the guy is rubbishing everything you do, you know, you can come home, for example, and say, today I want to just be nice to this guy. So you put, you know, petals, and then you put some candles around the bed. When he comes and asks you, whose funeral is it? You know, then you know you've lost out on that kind of guy.
And that immediately just takes the whole thing.
Because you'll never try it again. Yeah, but you know, if he recognizes that and he notices that it's a special day tonight or today, then that's a recipient guy.
Yeah. There's another type of boundary, though, that's very useful. It's actually very helpful to say to somebody who's abusing you, if you ever do that again, I'm just going to go out for the day and you won't see me again. You know, and that's my boundary. If you say that thing or you do this thing, I will be away from the house for the next 24 hours. If you do things like that, it can actually stop people carrying out those behaviors.
They know where to draw the line.
They actually recognize that now that's a boundary. So it's worth setting boundaries like that. The biggest, I tell you what the biggest problem with abuse is, though, it's a thing called gaslighting. An abuser often makes you doubt your own abilities. So you're very upset by something they've just said, and then they look at you and they say, I didn't say that, or I didn't mean that, or no, that didn't happen.
Or they turn it around.
They turn it totally around, and you end up thinking, did I really?
I am the problem.
You know, what's going on here? Am I mad? You know? Now, that makes it very, very difficult to figure out what's going on in the relationship if you're the victim.
Okay, you mentioned that there are two types of emotional abuse, one that can be sorted out and one that really there is no light at the end of the tunnel. How does one identify which is which? Because, how does one identify which is which?
Well, it is surprisingly difficult. And that's the one of the reasons why people struggle for ages and ages and ages to try and cope with these things. Because, like I say, I always call it boiling frogs. You know, it slowly starts, and to begin with, it's just slightly weird. 2 years later, it's absolutely poisonous, but you've got used to it, and so you carry on. The most important thing you should do if you begin to worry about the relationship is go and talk to a professional, because if you just start talking to a professional, in 10 seconds they'll spot what's going on, because they've literally seen it thousands of times before.
Right,
to you, it's something totally unique. You know, you've never experienced it in your life before. Every therapist that ever there is sees 4 or 5 a week, you see, so they spot the signs straight away.
There is the refresher personality who is able to rejuvenate. They can do something really outrageous in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then for the next 1 week he's a really nice guy. Yeah, and with that kind of guy, there's hope that sometimes you could actually realize he's trying to change his ways, and he's trying to, like, you know, be congruent with you, to live with you.
But you see, against that, you also get what's called the cycle of abuse. You get the abuser who, there's a terrible incident, and then immediately afterwards,
really
huge remorse, hugely sweet.
He's even asking you to pray together.
Yes, and for a week everything feels lovely, and then you start feeling the tension rising again.
Yeah.
So it is enormously complicated. It's unfair, actually, to just bundle the whole thing together and just call it emotional abuse, because there are so many different types.
Aspects.
And some are, as we said, completely insoluble.
Okay.
The relationship has to end, and others can be dealt with.
All right, there's a question here from Mo. She says that her husband recently asked the house help to leave and he knows she's been looking for a job. Would this qualify as emotional abuse?
Say that again?
The husband recently asked the house help to leave. She's looking for a job. So in short, my conclusion of this is that possibly she's looking for a job,
Yeah, I get
but
it.
he has asked the house help to leave, so of course she has to stay home.
She's grounded.
Yes, she's grounded. And ideally, I guess, normally you would imagine the man is the one who go to work, she'll remain home. So it's almost manipulative.
Yeah, I mean, if that is the only thing that's happened in 10 years of marriage, then of course it's not emotional abuse, it's a terrible misunderstanding. But if alongside that we've got a whole set of controlling behaviours, like I don't like it when you spend the weekend with your mother, or I don't like the friends you hang out with, or I don't want you to work, you can see a pattern starts to build up. Now that is emotional abuse. So this might be one piece of evidence within the whole thing.
So it doesn't qualify as emotional abuse
On
here,
its
depending
own,
on
its own.
Okay.
But if it's part of a whole set of abusive things, then yes, it certainly is.
The incidental bit, actually, Chris is right, is not necessarily a problem. If it's just one, like in a lifetime, or one in 2 years. Yeah, but if this guy has a trend,
Yeah, exactly.
where he notices that every time you want to break out of the shell, he finds something to keep you back in, then definitely you have a problem with that kind of guy. Earlier on, when you mentioned the idea of trying to break out, there are emotional filters that if you're experienced, I mean, if you've got the discerning mind, you could use, like hobbies, like finding new things to do together, not on your own, and dragging the guy along, or the woman, like if they never travel, you just tell them, hey, let's go somewhere. Yeah, then definitely you create a different space, because part of the problem that abusers have is that they're so domineering in their space. When you get them out of that space, something changes. They get a bit off balance, and you're thinking, oh, we're actually at your mother's house. Okay, so I have to be in my best behavior. Yeah, and sometimes when you get back to your space, you realize something has let go a little. Yeah, and so maybe there is hope in that kind of person. But if he's the kind of guy who keeps telling you things that make you, stay down there, even if you take him to Timbuktu,
it's not going to change.
It's not going to help.
Okay. Can you link this kind of abuse possibly to previous relationships and a history, basically?
Oh, it's very common for there to be a history like this. Unfortunately, a thing that we all do in our sort of childhood, teens, early 20s is we form a template of the type of person we are attracted to. And when I say attracted, I mean superficially. But it becomes the filter that determines who you start relationships with. Now, the danger is that you've chosen a template which involves a tendency to be abusive. So it's very, very common for somebody to be in an abusive relationship. However it happens, it ends, you go straight out, and frankly, you're with the same guy with a different name. Incidentally, I just said guy then. This thing is just as prevalent from women as it is from men. It's absolutely equal opportunities issue, this.
But I'd like to know what Chris thinks about the fact that sometimes I had a case once where the woman kind of gave up on the man, but when the baby came along, all her attention is on the child until, the man is like, no, you're spoiling this baby. Yeah, because you're doting over that child as an emotional escape from your problem. So then the husband now comes blazing, and sometimes, in fact, what she was saying is that maybe that then attracts his attention, because he also wants to wedge himself in between the baby and
he suddenly feels left out, and he also wants to be appreciated.
In fact, there's a general principle buried in that, and you mentioned it earlier. Who needs who more in the relationship? And if the balance of power is very unequal, then abusive relationships start to develop, as he mentioned. Now, one of the best ways to start unraveling a balance of power emotional issue is to start needing the relationship less. So if you start to build up your social life and build up your interests, get a new job, all the other things that you do, that is perceived by the other person as needing them less. Now all of a sudden they have to up their game.
True.
You get the idea.
Yes. So there's a risk when you have what I'd call a relationship almost suffocated. You're so needy of the person that they feel they need to step back a bit.
Unfortunately, nowadays, of course, that is more common, because in the good old days, of course, you lived in some village, you knew every single person, you had lots of companions. You did not need your spouse as much as we now do. Now you live in an anonymous estate, in a house with just two people,
you don't know your neighbors.